Hi, welcome back to Criminology. Now we're going to look at Chapter 2, the nature and extent of crime. One of the many versions of Aesop's fables about the three blind men and an elephant. A circus comes to town and the residents of a home for the blind are invited to experience the elephant. When one blind man is led to the elephant, he touches one of its legs and it feels like the size and shape. And he touches it, well, that's okay. Another man happens to touch the tail, and still another feels the trunk. Back at their residence, they argue about the nature of the beast. Says the first man, an elephant is obviously like the trunk of a tree. No, says the second, it's more like a rope. Well, you're both wrong, says the third. The elephant is like a big snake. All three are partly right, for each has described the part of the animal that he has touched. So the assessment of the nature and extent of crime often suffers from the same shortcomings as the three blind men's assessment of the elephant. Researcher A may make assessments on the basis of arrest records. Researcher B may rely on the conviction rates to describe crime, and researcher C may use the number of convicts serving in prison sentences as their formation. None of the researchers, however, may be in a position to assess the full nature and extent of crime. Each is limited by the kinds of data he or she uses. So questions about how crime is measured and what those measurements reveal about the nature and extent of crime are among some of the most important issues in contemporary criminology. Researchers, theorists, and practitioners need information in order to explain and prevent crime and to operate agencies that deal with criminal problem. So this chapter helps us explore and understand the various sources of crime data available for Canada. Now, both the advantages and the limitations of the sources of crime data are going to be discussed to assist your understanding of the types of conclusions that can effectively be drawn from each. Primary sources of crime statistics. So what, how, or where do we get all of our primary information? There are several sources of data to clarify the nature and extent of crime. The sources can include reported data from the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey, or the UCR, and the UCR2. Or it can also come from the victim-reported data. Sources would include the victim surveys and self-report surveys, and we'll explore those further. Statistics Canada is responsible for producing statistics along with one of Statistics Canada's arms, the Canadian Centre for Justice Statistics. Now, these statistics are statistic-based organizations produce monthly reports available to services, organizations, government, schools, and the public. Now we're going to begin by looking at the UCR, that's the Uniform Crime Report. Just for your information and some background, the UCR has been in effect since 1962 with the addition of the UCR2 in 1988. The UCR reports the number of criminal offenses that occurred in each police agency, jurisdiction, the clearance status of each reported crime, and the number of people who have been charged. Now the UCR2 is an incident-based report that enables a greater detail than the UCR alone. It includes information like the weapon that was used, if there was a weapon involved, what specifically was stolen, characteristics of the incidents, and additional information like that. Now, all data is used in multiple ways. They do inform the federal, provincial, and municipal governments regarding policies, legislations, budgets. Many of the data are calculated using the following formula. the number of crimes reported over the Canadian population times 100,000. This will create a rate per 100,000 people. And you can see the example in your text. Now, of course, there are some error in these data. For example, police make errors in reporting in some cases. Some agencies may be more stringent or more loose with the definition of what is a crime. And of course, many errors are really just unintentional, but they're nonetheless errors. There is what's known as the Crime Severity Index. Now, this is the third means of crime data collected. This allows all to track crime severity from year to year. Also very important about how much data is the crime, how much of this data reports of crime that's not reported. And of course, you can't report the unreported. If a crime or a victimization is not reported to police, often it is never captured as data. Therefore, how accurate can our data actually be? Now, it can be through this next form of data where some of the victim's voice is captured. And this is what we call the victim surveys. And it's an important source of data. Here, crime victims have a voice. And here we're going to consider two forms. There's the General Social Survey, Victimization Survey, which was conducted every 5 years since 1988. The data collected from the results of these surveys is some of the best ways to get information of victims' view. Unreported crime gets included in there. A great effort goes into encouraging participation of about 20,000 citizens every 5 years. Now, this form of data collection has its own faults. However, it does round out the needed data to, to be more complete picture of crime in Canada. Now, another way to determine the amount and types of crime actually committed is to ask people to report their own criminal acts in a confidential interview or, more commonly, on an anonymous questionnaire. Now, these investigations are called self-report surveys. Like other methods of data collection, they have their own drawbacks. The questionnaires are often limited to petty acts such as truancy and therefore do not represent the range of criminal acts that people may commit. Another drawback of self-reports is that most of them are administered to high school and college students. So the information they yield applies only to young people attending school. Now, many self-reports measure lack validity. Remember, validity. It measures what it's supposed to measure. That the data obtained do not correspond with some other criteria, such as school records. That measures the same behavior. So finally, samples, well, they may be biased. And we have to be and that's why criminology as a science-based study is that it's looking for unbiased information. Okay, now let's start into this area of crime trends. Okay? Over the history of Canada, crime trends have grown as Canada has grown. And it's fluctuated in conjunction with other trends, things like conflicts that might occur in Canada, the economics, politics, can all affect trends. There are categories of trends, and we're going to begin with trends in violent crime, things like homicide, attempted murder, sexual assault, robbery, and abductions. Now you'll see in figure 2.8, and you can see violent crime trends hit a low in 2014. While it's been higher, as in 2008, it has increased some in more recent years by 2018. And the number of variables can have an impact on these data. You know, whether or not there was mass murder in any of that period could influence that data. The Me Too direction, how did that influence the number of reported crimes from the past? Media reporting and in the news. Trends in property crime, which include theft, break-in and enter, fraud, motor vehicle theft, and possessions of stolen goods, well, much of the property crime is reported in a UCR. That's the Uniform Crime Report. Trends in victimizations, which are sourced in large part through policing reports in the UCR2 and victim surveys, are also addressed. It is a significant note that since 2014, both the crime rate and the CSI have seen annual increases. And we're going to explore this area more completely when we enter into Chapter 3, where we're going to spend a little more on the chapter of victims and victimizations. So we're going to look at the crime patterns. Here the criminologist is looking at when crime happens, who or what groups are more prone to commit crimes, and where is crime more likely to occur. Ecology of crime is an interesting phraseology. It relates to what time of the year, month, or days are of greater likelihood for commissions of a crime. Warm weather of the summer is most likely, and there are exceptions to this. Robbery is more common in the winter, Christmas shopping, and more money in shops with money. Other ecology issues are times of the month. When pensions are being distributed to older people, that might be a time when more crime occurs. Social assistance checks being sent, mailbox theft. And weather can also affect the degree of crime. As temperatures rise, so do some forms of crime. The use of firearms is an important variable that affects the lethalness of crime. Canada has a long history of firearms control legislation. This includes the firearms safety course. There's a written test, a background check, and then a possession and acquisition license, known as PAL, before being able to purchase a non-restricted firearm. Now, criminologists are often at some odds to which elements influence crime the most. One thing we should keep in mind is there are probably very few cause-effect relationships to feel really confident about. However, in research, there is what's known as a correlational relationship. Now, these aren't as certain as cause and effect. Correlational just means that some issues seem to occur at the same time as other issues. However, they don't cause one another. They just have a strong relationship in that they occur at the same time. Also, although trends are data-driven, they are rarely cause and effect. As much data is collected on crime comes from carried sources, free of error and represent police, criminal behavior, and victims. Now we'll start to review some of these patterns or characteristics of who, in general terms, commits crime. Is it the poor? Is it the older folks? Is it the younger folks? Are they educated, male or female? And of which ethnic backgrounds are more likely to commit crimes? All of the patterns that we're going to explore are not cut and dried. Every element we consider has either some controversy to it or is certainly not absolute. So we're going to start with social class and crime. Researchers disagree strongly about whether social class is related to crime. Controversies remain about social class of people who commit crimes. Some of the controversy is related to the definition used for lower class. There is an economic lower class. Now, it's the first and second quintile. Now, that just means it's the lower of the quintiles that Stats Canada collects data on. There's 5 quintiles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each has 20% of the population. So the lower 2 quintiles, 1 and 2, are the lower end of the economic scale, which also has a lower end of education, more single parenthood, lower wages, and underemployed or unemployed. and there is less prestigious blue-collar occupations. It's a big demographic, this lower class, with a wide swath of diverse elements that make it difficult to nail down a specific result about social class. The way in which data is collected, the self-reports tend to produce data on a wide variety of results that point to economic inequity acts collaboratively with other indicators of marginalized people to create a set of conditions where criminal behavior appears to be good or perhaps only a choice. An interesting controversy is that there may be a connection between criminal behavior and lower class. However, the cost of white-collar crime, corporate upper-class crimes, things like embezzlement, fraud, is far greater than that of the lower class, where it's mostly robbery, burglary, and assaults. So can we think in terms of age and crime? Is there more clear division here? Well, unlike social classes, criminologists have more agreement on the characteristic of age. Crime is basically a young person's activity. Check out figure 2.11. The fact that people commit less crime as they age and mature is termed aging out. Aging out relates to older people tend to have a longer view, different perspective. Crime has too many risks, and if we grow out of crime, this does not mean no one over age 50 commits crime, just that it's dramatically fewer and that youthful people tend to commit more crime than the older. This might seem obvious, but what about gender and crime? Well, except for such crimes as prostitution, maybe even shoplifting and welfare fraud, males traditionally commit more crimes than females of all ages. Self-report surveys which show more similarities in male and female criminal activity than official reports do find that males commit more offenses than females. However, interestingly, several of these studies suggest that gender differences in crime may be narrowing. Though scholars disagree on the form or extent of female crime, they do seem to agree that the crimes women commit are more closely associated with their socioeconomic position in society. Some criminologists have looked at biological differences related to antisocial and hormonal influences to explain this gender gap. Now, lastly, we can also touch on race and crime. In relation to race and crime, Black and Indigenous persons are vastly overrepresented in the Canadian criminal justice system. Researchers suggest that disparities in the rate of offending based on race and ethnicity can be explained, at least in part, by social conditions where people live. Economic conditions and being a visible minority tend to be hand in hand. Now, some criminologists have raised an issue that some police officers may use racial profiling, and it's been an issue in the Canadian news over the last few years. It is a known issue, and an effort has been made to address this, but it still seems to occur. Generally, when we consider race and crime, the lack of economic security, social disorganization, and subculture adaptation, which really is just you're being socialized to commit crimes, and we will expand on this more completely in Chapter 7. Well, it could lead us to, okay, what about socialization and crime? Can we be socialized to commit crime? Well, socialization and crime and the lingering long-standing effects of racism and discrimination on people, stigma, discrimination, these all can happen both in regards to gender, but certainly within race and crime. Now, we're going to conclude this particular chapter with a brief look at the use of computerized crime mapping currently being employed by most police agencies in Canada now. It's using GIC, which is Geographic Information System, which takes all crime-related data, the whens, the where crimes occurred, to further explore police deployment strategies. So once we know where and when, then maybe we can incur or move more supports in those areas. And it creates an interactive map which identifies the hotspots and deploys resources in a more effective manner to reduce crime. Okay, this is going to bring complete to our chapter 2 on the nature and extent of crime. Now, we really haven't scratched the surface much. And as mentioned, this is in this chapter's videos, we're going to further explore victims and victimization next week in chapter 3. And you will see as we get through not just the victim and victimization and start looking at theories, we'll start getting into the elements of crime in the later chapters. All right, everybody. Good luck, and we'll see you later, and we'll see you in week 3. Bye now.